Hey there. I know why you're here. You're looking for a story that will help you drift off into a peaceful sleep. Something calming, a little mysterious. Something that carries your mind away. Well, you've come to the right place. Before we begin tonight's journey, do me a little favor. Tap the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Even just a good night. It really helps more sleepy souls like you find their way here. Now, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let's begin tonight's story. It started with a sound no one wants to hear in the middle of the night. 3 slow, deliberate knocks at the front door. Each night, they came back, always at the same hour, always with the same eerie stillness on the porch outside. But when the door was dusted for fingerprints, only one print was found, and it was his. The problem, he swears he never touched the door. As the nights grew longer and the knocks grew louder, the truth unraveled into something far more chilling. What if the thing on the other side wasn't trying to break in, but trying to come back? And what if it already knew his name, his face, and his touch? This is the story of the man who discovered the knocker's fingerprint matched his own. It was 3:17 a.m. when the sound came. One knock, soft enough to almost be mistaken for the wind, yet deliberate enough to drag sleep from heavy eyes. The room was thick with darkness, the air still and suffocating as the silence that followed. There it was again, louder this time. A second knock, not hurried, not frantic, just slow, steady, patient. A third knock echoed, its weight settling like a stone in the chest. The sound was so out of place in the dead of night. It felt like a violation. He lay there, paralyzed, under the weight of his own pounding heart, staring at the ceiling, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. The house seemed to listen too, walls tight and unyielding, the quiet humming with a question he couldn't bring himself to ask aloud. Who's knocking at this hour, and why? Morning came, but peace did not. The sun's pale light only sharpened the edges of unease. Logic tried to wrestle control, whispering explanations, maybe a neighbor, maybe a drunk passerby. Yet, there was no sign of life outside. No footprints on the dew-soaked porch. No stray marks on the wooden frame. The air smelled stale somehow, and as he traced his fingers over the door's smooth surface, a chill crawled up his arm. He told himself it was nothing, yet the thought clung stubbornly. I didn't imagine it. That night, the hours stretched thin and fragile as he waited in bed. Every tick of the clock seemed louder, every creak of the house sharper. Then, as if on cue, 3 knocks came again, at precisely 3:17. They were louder now. He sat up in bed, the sound vibrating faintly through the floorboards. This wasn't random, not a branch or shifting wood. Each knock was spaced apart, deliberate in its rhythm. 1, 2, 3. His breath caught, ears straining for footsteps or voices outside. But there was nothing, only silence, so thick it seemed to press in from every wall. Slowly, feet touched cold floorboards. He crept to the peephole, hands shaking. Darkness stared back. The porch light flickered, struggling to hold back a thick, impenetrable black. No figure, no movement, just void. For a moment, he thought he saw something shift, a glint of something pale, but when he blinked, it was gone. By the third night, fear had sharpened into obsession. He stayed up long past midnight, staring at the door from across the room. Phone clutched tight with 911 ready to dial. Again, right on time, the knocks came. 3 slow raps, each carrying more weight than the last. He flinched at the sound, his body locking up like prey, under a predator's gaze. The sound wasn't just outside anymore. It felt closer, like the vibration of each knock traveled down his spine, resonating somewhere deep and primal. His mind raced. Who knocked like this? Not aggressively, not politely, but with a strange, unsettling calm, as if they knew he was listening, as if they knew he was afraid. The fourth night brought resolve, if not answers. He set up a camera on the porch, motion triggered, high resolution. His thoughts circled endlessly as midnight slipped past. This would end the madness. Either there was someone out there, or there wasn't. His eyes never left the live feed, hands clenching tight in his lap. When 3:17 came, the sound nearly sent him out of his skin. 3 heavy knocks, louder than ever. They rattled the door frame, the pictures on the wall shivering slightly with each impact. His gaze snapped to the camera feed. Empty. Nothing moved on the porch. The air outside seemed utterly still, thick and unmoving. Yet the sound continued to echo in his ears, as real and solid as the beating of his heart. The next morning, he scoured the footage. Hours of staring at static darkness, eyes burning with fatigue. No shadow passed the camera. No figure approached. The knocks weren't even on the audio recording. The only sound was the faint hiss of background static. His stomach knotted tighter with each replay. It didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. As the sun climbed higher, his resolve cracked. He needed evidence, physical evidence, something to anchor him back to reality. His trembling hands ordered a fingerprint kit online. On the 5th night, he didn't bother answering the knocks. They came as expected, 3 precise thuds that seemed to reverberate through his ribcage more than the door itself. He sat motionless, staring at the handle, refusing to move until daylight broke the spell. When morning finally came, he brushed black powder gently across the wood grain. Each sweep of the brush felt like a prayer, each speck of black dust clinging to his hopes for answers. Then it appeared, a single perfect fingerprint in the center of the door. Its ridges and whorls stood out stark against the wood, intricate and undeniable. Relief and dread warred inside him. He had found something, but as he stared at that print, unease seeped in like cold water. The fingerprint scanner blinked at him with its faint green light, the glow seeming almost alive in the dimness of the room. He stared at the small device on the table, as though it might sprout teeth and bite him if he dared to move closer. His hands hovered above it, trembling slightly, and in his chest, his heartbeat felt too loud, too irregular. Finally, with a deep breath that barely steadied him, he placed the lifted print from the door onto the scanner. The machine hummed softly, the sound far too gentle for the gravity of the moment. Each second stretched into eternity. He stared at the display as though willing it to produce a result that would make sense. A neighbor's print, a stranger's, anyone's but his own. But when the result came, his stomach dropped as though the floor had opened beneath him. One match. Only one. His own fingerprint, flashing across the tiny screen in stark black and white ridges, perfectly matched. 100% certainty. For a long moment, the breath refused to come, his chest tightening until he thought he might pass out. He hadn't touched the door, not since the knocking began. He'd been careful, deliberate. Even before that, he couldn't remember the last time his bare hand grazed that wood. Yet the scanner wasn't lying. His fingerprint was there, clear as day, pressed into the door as though left moments ago. He tried to rationalize it, his thoughts spiraling in frantic circles. Maybe it was old, from before he'd cleaned the door during spring. But no, He remembered that cleaning vividly. He'd worn gloves, part of his cautious nature when dealing with household chemicals. Could the system be wrong? Could the scanner have glitched somehow? But no, the thought brought no comfort. Deep down, he already knew this wasn't a mistake. Something was wrong. Very wrong. As darkness fell again, the house seemed to press in on him from all sides. The walls felt closer somehow, the air heavier, almost thick enough to choke on. He checked the locks twice, 3 times, his fingers lingering on the deadbolt like it was a lifeline. He stayed up that night, staring at the door from his armchair, phone clutched tight in his hand. The clock ticked louder with each passing minute. 3 a.m. came and went. By 3:15, his hands were slick with sweat. Then, at 3:17 exactly, the knocks came again. 3 deliberate thuds that seemed to shake the very air. He didn't flinch this time. He didn't run to check the peephole or the camera feed. He only sat there, body rigid, heart hammering in his throat. The sound wasn't just in his ears. It felt inside his bones, resonating deep, as though the house itself was amplifying it. When the last knock faded, silence returned with a suffocating weight. He realized he'd been holding his breath and let it out in a shaky gasp, his fingers tightening around the phone until his knuckles ached. Morning brought no answers. The fingerprint remained on the door, mocking him with its impossible presence. He scrubbed at it with a damp cloth until his arms burned, but the print held fast, as clear and fresh as the moment he'd first found it. Out of desperation, he brushed more powder across the door, praying for a new clue. But there were no other prints, not a single smudge, not even his own aside from the one in the center. It was as if no one else, nothing else had ever touched that door. By the 7th night, sleep was a foreign concept. He paced the living room, checking the locks and windows, feeling his sanity fray at the edges. The knocks came again, 3 steady blows, and this time they carried something different. Beneath the sound, faint but undeniable, was a whisper. He froze, heart thundering. The voice seemed to seep through the keyhole, curling through the room in a breathy murmur. "Why do you keep locking me out?" The voice wasn't unfamiliar. It was his own. The voice shouldn't have been possible. It shouldn't have been his. Yet there it was, soft and curling like smoke through the keyhole, carrying his own tone, his own cadence, the faint tremor that always crept in when he was scared. "Why do you keep locking me out?" The words replayed in his head like a broken record, each repetition burrowing deeper until it scraped bone. He backed away from the door, step by step, his hands raised as though trying to ward off an unseen presence. His knees buckled against the edge of the sofa, and he sank down, chest heaving with shallow, panicked breaths. For the first time in nights, he didn't wait for dawn to act. At 3:30 a.m., he gathered what little courage remained and pressed his eye to the peephole. The porch lay empty, the stillness outside unnerving in its perfection. No wind, no sound. Even the trees beyond the yard seemed to have frozen, their branches locked mid-sway. He almost convinced himself he'd imagined it, until he saw the faintest movement, a ripple in the darkness, like someone shifting their weight just out of sight. He stumbled back, his shoulder striking the wall, and he clutched his chest as though holding his heart in place. By morning, he felt unmoored from reality. His reflection in the bathroom mirror startled him. Eyes bloodshot, skin pale and clammy, a faint tremor running through his hands as he splashed cold water on his face. His mind kept circling the same impossible thought. What if it isn't someone out there? What if it's me? The idea made no sense, but neither did the fingerprint, neither did the voice, neither did the fact that the knocks came precisely at 3:17 every single night, like clockwork, like ritual. That evening, he did something he swore he wouldn't. He touched the door, his palm pressed flat against the cool wood, his fingers tracing the faint ridges where his print still lingered like a brand. The contact sent a chill up his spine so sharp he almost cried out. He jerked his hand back and stared at it, half expecting to see a smear of black powder or something worse. But his skin was clean. Still, he felt as though something unseen had clung to him, burrowed under the surface of his flesh. When the knocks came that night, he didn't move. He sat rigid in the armchair, eyes wide, breath shallow, staring at the door as though it might open of its own accord. The sound was louder this time, the rhythm slower, almost tender, like a friend asking to be let in from the cold. And then came the whisper again. "I'm so tired of knocking. Won't you let me in?" This time, the voice didn't sound like his. It was his down to the slight rasp in his throat, the exact way he spoke when trying to mask fear with calm. His phone buzzed violently on the table beside him, snapping the spell, a motion alert from the porch camera. Hands shaking, he snatched it up and opened the feed. Nothing. The porch sat empty, the camera capturing only shadows and stillness. Yet the notification had come at 3:17 on the dot, the same second the first knock hit the door. He replayed the clip over and over, eyes burning as he searched for even the slightest flicker of movement. But there was nothing, not a breeze, not a moth, nothing. Morning felt alien. The house seemed to hum faintly, as though it had developed its own pulse overnight. He ran his fingers through his unwashed hair, eyes darting to the door every few minutes. The fingerprint was still there, impossibly clean and sharp. He thought of calling someone, a friend, the police, anyone, but stopped. What would he say? That his own fingerprint haunted him, that his voice whispered through his keyhole every night. He knew how it would sound. By the 8th night, he no longer waited for the knocking with dread. He waited with resignation, as if some part of him had already surrendered. The hours between midnight and 3:17 were a waking nightmare, his thoughts circling like vultures over a carcass. He couldn't stop asking himself the same question, over and over. What if it's not someone else out there? What if it's me? The idea sat like a splinter under his skin, impossible to ignore. Every creak of the house felt like a breath against his neck, every shadow a whisper of movement just outside his field of vision. He kept telling himself he was imagining it, that he was sleep-deprived, paranoid, but deep down he knew the truth was far stranger. That night, the knocks came again, but this time there were 4. The first 3 landed with their familiar measured weight, but the fourth knock was softer, hesitant, almost shy. His breath caught as he realized it wasn't on the door at all, it was on the window behind him. He froze, every muscle locking in place as the sound echoed through the silent room. Slowly, painfully, he turned his head. The curtains were drawn, but a faint outline pressed against the fabric, a hand, 5 fingers splayed, palm flat, as though testing the barrier between inside and out. His own hand trembled in his lap, matching the shape perfectly. He didn't move, didn't blink, couldn't. The hand withdrew, and the whisper came again. "It's cold out here. Please, let me in." His voice, softer now, almost pleading. The words curled around his spine like fingers, tightening until his chest ached. He wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but sit there staring at the curtain, as though it might dissolve under his gaze. Instead, he whispered back without thinking, the words leaving his lips before his brain could stop them. "What are you?" The silence that followed was worse than any sound. It stretched long and suffocating, filling the room with a pressure that felt alive. Then, from the door, a faint reply came. Not whispered this time, but spoken in a voice that matched his perfectly. "I'm you, the part you left outside." His stomach twisted violently, and he stumbled to his feet, backing away until his shoulders hit the far wall. The words replayed in his mind, their meaning sinking in like teeth. "The part you left outside." Memories flooded in unbidden, nights spent avoiding the mirror, the gnawing sense that something inside him was missing. He remembered standing at this very door weeks ago, his hand on the knob, staring at the wood with a hollow kind of dread. He couldn't recall why he hadn't opened it then, only that every instinct screamed not to. And now he wondered if that was the moment it began. Morning came, but the light brought no comfort. It felt thin and weak, unable to chase the shadows that clung stubbornly to every corner. The fingerprint remained on the door, unchanged, defying his every attempt to scrub it away. He stood staring at it, feeling the weight of unseen eyes pressing in from all sides. He no longer bothered with the camera. He no longer bothered with explanations. Deep down, he understood whatever was knocking wasn't going to stop. Not until he answered. The 9th night arrived like a predator circling closer. He sat in the armchair, staring at the door as 3:17 approached. The house seemed to hum with anticipation, the air thick enough to choke on. When the knocks came, they were softer this time, almost tender. The voice followed, so quiet he barely caught it. "You can't keep me out forever." For the first time, he rose. The hours leading up to the 10th night were hollow. Time seemed to move strangely, each minute stretching, yawning, then snapping forward like a broken clock. He barely remembered eating, barely registered drinking water. His entire existence was reduced to one axis, him and the door. The words from the night before had rooted in his mind, spreading like invasive vines. "You can't keep me out forever." Every syllable carried his own voice, his own inflection, yet felt utterly foreign, as if spoken by a twin he had never known. The thought looped endlessly in his head, drowning out all else, until he began to question whether he had ever truly been alone in this house. At precisely 3:17, the knocks returned, softer now, like gentle tapping from a friend too timid to disturb. He stood there, feet planted firmly on the cold floor, eyes fixed on the door, as though he could see through it. His hand hovered near the lock. The voice came again, muffled through the wood yet chillingly clear. "I'm tired of waiting." "Aren't you?" It didn't sound threatening. It sounded weary, patient, like someone who had waited long enough. His fingers brushed the cold metal of the deadbolt. A shiver ran through him, not from fear this time, but from the quiet, unnerving sense of recognition that bubbled up like a memory half remembered. He tore himself away, retreating to the safety of the kitchen. The house felt smaller now, the walls bending inward as if breathing. He splashed water on his face at the sink, but it didn't help. The reflection staring back at him in the window wasn't quite right. His own eyes met his, but they seemed duller somehow, darker at the edges. The face was his, yet it looked like a mask stretched too tight over something else. He backed away, heart hammering. When he blinked, it was gone. Just his face again, pale and exhausted. But the image clung to him. A phantom burned into his mind. The day passed in fragments. He heard faint knocking in his sleep-deprived haze, sometimes from the walls, sometimes from the window. Always 3 measured taps, no more, no less. He began to wonder if the sound had followed him inside. Maybe it wasn't knocking on the house anymore. Maybe it was knocking on him. He touched his chest, half expecting to feel vibrations beneath his ribs. The thought made his stomach lurch. He spent the rest of the day pacing the house like a caged animal, his eyes darting to the door every few minutes, as though expecting to catch it, opening on its own. When night came, he was waiting again, the fingerprint kit spread out beside him. He didn't know why he bothered. The original print still lingered on the wood, impossibly pristine no matter how many times he had tried to scrub it away. But some stubborn part of him needed to try, needed to cling to the hope that this was still a problem that could be solved with logic. At 3:17, 3 knocks landed softly, almost affectionately, and this time a faint laugh followed, not mocking, familiar, his own laugh, a sound he hadn't made in weeks. The voice murmured through the door, "You used to open the door for me. Why won't you now?" His fingers brushed the lock again. He didn't turn it, not yet, but something in his chest shifted, some deeply buried instinct whispering that it would almost be a relief to let it in, to stop fighting, to stop wondering. But another voice, his own inner voice this time, raw and panicked, screamed that nothing about this was relief. This was a test. This was a line he could never uncross. The sun rose again, pale and indifferent. He sat slumped in the armchair, eyelids heavy, his hand still resting on the lock, though he hadn't turned it. Outside, the morning seemed too quiet. No bird song, no passing cars, just silence so thick it felt alive. He stood slowly and reached for the door, tracing the fingerprint once more. He pressed his own finger beside it. A perfect match. For a moment his vision doubled. 2 hands on the door, one his, one identical yet subtly wrong. The second hand faded as quickly as it had come, leaving only his own trembling fingers. The day unraveled slowly, each hour stretching longer than the last. He wandered from room to room like a ghost, haunting his own home, unsure what he was searching for. Every surface seemed unfamiliar now, every shadow carrying weight. Even the walls felt closer somehow, as though the house itself were leaning in to listen. He caught himself murmuring under his breath as he moved, half conscious of the words spilling out. "I didn't open the door. I didn't open it. I never opened it." The mantra felt necessary, like an anchor to keep him from drifting too far into thoughts he didn't dare finish. But in the back of his mind, another voice, softer, calmer, almost amused, whispered, "Didn't you?" By dusk, he found himself standing in front of the door again, fingers brushing the cool wood. The fingerprint stared back at him, mocking in its permanence. He'd scrubbed it. He'd used every chemical he could find, even sanded the spot lightly in a desperate moment. Still, it remained, fresh and flawless. It wasn't just residue anymore. It was a mark, a claim, and deep down he knew it wasn't going to fade until he faced what was leaving it behind. When 3:17 approached, he sat in the armchair as before, eyes locked on the door. The knocks came, 3 slow and deliberate taps, but this time they weren't on the door. They came from inside the house. His head snapped toward the sound, and his breath caught. It was coming from the hallway closet. 3 gentle knocks, like fingertips brushing the wood from within. He rose to his feet slowly, legs trembling as though carrying the weight of lead. The knocks came again, softer now, almost hesitant. His heart pounded against his ribs as he reached for the closet handle. But before his fingers could touch it, a whisper drifted out from behind the door. "You locked me out there too." His hand recoiled as if burned. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the edge of the armchair. The house seemed to sigh around him, a faint groan of wood settling, or perhaps something deeper. He clutched his chest, gasping for air as panic clawed up his throat. He didn't move for what felt like hours, his eyes fixed on the closet door, waiting for it to rattle, for it to swing open, for something to crawl out. But nothing came. The silence settled again, heavier than before. Morning broke eventually, but it felt wrong. The light was pale and thin, barely cutting through the heavy curtains. He moved cautiously through the house, checking every door, every window, as though expecting to find them ajar. But everything was as he'd left it, locked, bolted, secured. And yet, the faint sense of being watched never left him. It clung to his skin like static electricity, making the hairs on his arms stand on end. Even his reflection seemed to follow him too closely, the eyes in the mirror holding a weight that wasn't entirely his own. By the 11th night, exhaustion and dread had twisted together into something unrecognizable. He no longer felt fully awake, yet sleep refused to claim him. At 3:17, the knocks came again, this time from the window behind him. He didn't turn. He didn't need to. He could feel it there, the weight of eyes pressing through the glass, the faint sound of fingertips dragging down the pane. Then softly, his voice came again. "I'm not out there anymore. I'm already here." He didn't move, not when the whisper faded, not when the air grew cold enough to fog his breath. The weight of those words, "I'm already here," pressed down on him like a lead blanket. He sat perfectly still in the armchair, fingers digging into the fabric so hard the stitching creaked under his grip. His eyes darted to the window behind him, then to the closet door across the room. Both remained silent now, but the house was no longer just a house. It felt alive. Watching, breathing, waiting for him to slip. For hours, he stayed like that, back straight, muscles burning with tension. At some point, the first sliver of dawn slid across the floorboards, but it brought no relief. It felt fake somehow, thin and pale, unable to banish the heavy presence lingering in the corners. When he finally stood, his legs wobbled beneath him. Every step down the hallway made the boards creak too loudly, echoing like distant knocks. He flinched at each sound, his skin prickling as though unseen fingers were tracing the back of his neck. In the bathroom, his reflection greeted him with a familiar face and unfamiliar eyes. They were sunken now, ringed in grey, but there was something else, something subtle, yet undeniable. The pupils seemed too wide, the whites too dull. For a fleeting second, he thought he saw the reflection smile, though his own lips stayed still. He stumbled back, gripping the sink as bile rose in his throat. When he dared to look again, the smile was gone. Only his face remained, pale and trembling. But the seed of doubt had been planted. That day passed in fragments. He didn't eat, didn't speak. Every sound in the house made him stiffen. The whisper of air through vents, the groan of settling wood, the faint tick of the clock. Each one felt deliberate, as if the house was testing how much more he could endure. His phone sat on the table, dark and lifeless. He didn't bother checking it. He knew the porch camera would show nothing. It always showed nothing. Yet the knocks kept coming. The whispers kept coming. When 3:17 arrived, he wasn't in the armchair. He was standing in front of the door, hand resting on the deadbolt. His breath came in shallow gasps, fogging the air as though winter had crept indoors. 3 knocks landed on the wood, soft, patient, certain. Then a 4th, and then a whisper, closer now, almost pressed against his ear. "You can open it this time. It's safe. I promise." His hand tightened on the lock. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding, loud enough to drown out everything else. Slowly, almost against his will, he began to turn the deadbolt. But then he stopped. Something deep in his gut, some primal instinct, screaming louder than the voice, yanked him back from the brink. His hand jerked away as though burned, and he stumbled back, chest heaving. The house exhaled around him, a faint sigh of disappointment, or perhaps warning. The knocks didn't return that night. Neither did the whispers, but that silence wasn't comforting. It was heavy, waiting. When dawn broke, he found himself staring at his hand. The fingers that had touched the lock felt numb, as if they didn't belong to him anymore. He flexed them slowly, but the sensation of wrongness lingered. He pressed his palm against the door beside the fingerprint. Perfect match. Same ridges, same loops, yet it felt foreign now, like he was wearing someone else's skin. The 12th night arrived, not with a storm or a crash, but with silence, so thick it seemed to choke the air itself. He sat in the corner of the living room now, knees drawn to his chest, his back pressed against the cold wall. The door loomed across the room, its faint outline in the dark mocking him with quiet authority. The fingerprint still lingered where it always had, pristine as though freshly pressed, and beside it now, fainter, almost hesitant, a second print had appeared. Identical in pattern, identical in size, identical in every way, except for something he couldn't name. It was like seeing his own face reflected in a warped mirror, familiar but wrong. He rubbed at his eyes until stars burst behind his lids, then looked again, praying it would vanish. But it didn't. When 3:17 came, the knocks were different. 3 soft, almost apologetic taps landed, not from the door, not from the windows, not from the closet, but from inside the walls themselves. He pressed his hands over his ears, but it was no use. The sound wasn't just audible, it was physical, vibrating through the floorboards, crawling up his spine. Knock, knock. The rhythm matched his heartbeat until he couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. His breath came fast and shallow, his ribs straining like a birdcage, trying to hold in a frantic creature. Then the voice came, not muffled now but clear, as though standing right beside him. "You locked me out so long. I had to find another way in." It was his own voice, softer than he remembered, almost tender. It didn't sound angry. It sounded tired. The words coiled around him like smoke, filling the space between his thoughts until he could no longer tell which ones were his. He clamped his hands over his mouth to stifle a sob, but it slipped through anyway, ragged and low. Somewhere deep inside, a small part of him whispered that the thing speaking wasn't lying, that it had been patient, too patient, waiting for him to break the lock himself. The house sighed around him, a faint groan like old wood settling, or like something shifting in the dark, stretching its limbs for the first time in years. He couldn't tell which. He stumbled to his feet, his legs weak as though carrying someone else's weight. The light switch didn't work when he slapped at it. The bulbs overhead stayed dead, leaving the room drenched in a darkness that felt thick, almost wet. In the pitch black, he felt it, a warm breath on the back of his neck, so close he could smell it. A familiar smell, his own. His heart slammed against his ribs, as he lurched forward, tripping over the edge of the rug. He crawled across the floor, scraping his palms raw against the wood, but every movement felt sluggish, as though the air had grown dense around him. Behind him, soft footsteps padded across the floorboards. He froze. The steps weren't heavy, not aggressive, just slow and measured, mirroring the way he'd paced the house so many nights before. He wanted to scream but couldn't. His throat locked tight as the steps drew closer. And then the voice, his voice, spoke again, closer this time, low and certain. "You're the one on the wrong side of the door now." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They settled into his mind with the quiet finality of a key turning in a lock. He pressed his palms over his ears, but the sound was already inside him, bouncing around his skull like a trapped insect. When dawn broke, pale and weak, he was curled on the floor, his face pressed against the cold wood. The house was silent, too silent. He pushed himself up on trembling arms and staggered toward the door. The fingerprint was gone now. Both of them were, in their place, a faint handprint spread across the wood, larger than his own. Or maybe not. Maybe it only looked larger because his own hand felt so small now, so frail. He raised his palm, pressed it against the mark, and felt a jolt of recognition. Not fear this time, but something deeper, a sinking sense that he'd been here before, that he'd always been here. The house was not the same. He felt it the moment he opened his eyes. The air was thicker now, heavy like a damp fog clinging to his skin. Light filtered weakly through the curtains, but it wasn't the kind of light he remembered. It was pale and washed out, as if the sun had been diluted. He sat up slowly, his body protesting with aches that felt too deep for one night's sleep. The wooden floor beneath him seemed to hum faintly, a low vibration that thrummed through his bones. He pressed his palm flat against it, and for a moment it felt warm, warmer than wood should be. His gaze drifted toward the door, and his breath caught. The handprint was gone. So was the fingerprint. The wood looked untouched, as though no one, nothing had ever knocked. But deep down, he knew it wasn't over. The absence felt more ominous than the marks themselves, like a predator slipping into silence before pouncing. His chest tightened. He tried to recall the events of the night before, but his memories came back in pieces, fragments of whispers, footsteps that weren't his own. A voice saying, "You're on the wrong side now." He stumbled to the bathroom, hoping cold water might jolt him back into clarity. But when he looked in the mirror, he froze. His face stared back at him, pale and gaunt, but something was wrong with his eyes. They weren't sunken or bloodshot. They were calm, too calm. The pupils were wide, the irises slightly dull, as though someone had copied them from memory and gotten the details just slightly off. He leaned closer, gripping the sink so hard, the porcelain groaned under his fingers. The face leaned closer too, but there was no tremor in its movement, no hesitation. When he blinked, it didn't. He stumbled back with a choked gasp, his shoulder slamming against the doorframe. The reflection still stared, its lips curling into a faint smile. He bolted from the bathroom and didn't stop until he reached the living room. His chest heaved with shallow, panicked breaths, and his mind raced in frantic loops. It's still in here. It's still with me. No, it's not with me. It's in me. The thought struck like a knife to the gut. He pressed a trembling hand to his chest, half expecting to feel another heartbeat beneath his own. The rest of the day passed in a haze. He wandered the house like a stranger in his own skin, touching furniture that no longer felt familiar, opening cabinets as if hoping to find proof that this was still his home. But every object seemed subtly wrong. The mugs, slightly the wrong shape, the clock ticking just off beat, the photos on the wall showing a version of his face that felt distant, unrecognizable. He pressed his palms to his temples, fighting the rising panic. Did I ever live here? Was this ever really my house? The thought clawed at him, deep and unrelenting. When night came, he didn't check the time. He didn't need to. The house let him know. A soft creak from the ceiling above, the faintest brush of footsteps in the hallway, and then, from the shadows behind him, a whisper. It's better in here, isn't it? Warmer. His head jerked toward the sound, but there was nothing, just darkness pressing in from all sides. He clamped his hands over his ears, but the voice slipped through anyway, wrapping around his thoughts like ivy. You were cold out there. You don't have to be anymore. The whisper carried a sickening familiarity, not just because it was his voice, but because it carried a weight, a history he couldn't quite name. Like a half-forgotten dream he'd been trying to shake since childhood. He squeezed his eyes shut and whispered back, his voice hoarse and trembling, "What do you want from me?" The answer came instantly, warm and steady. "I already have you." The hours dragged like chains across his mind, each tick of the clock pulling him further from what he once thought of as normal. He sat slumped in the armchair now, though he wasn't sure how long he'd been there. The house was quiet, oppressively so, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that sound was still happening somewhere. Low murmurs just beyond hearing, like voices speaking underwater. He rubbed his temples, but it did nothing to stop the pressure building in his skull. He couldn't tell if it was a headache or something deeper, something clawing at the walls of his mind from the inside out. When he finally stood, his legs felt unsteady, as though he'd been sitting far longer than he realized. He stumbled to the hallway and froze. The pictures on the walls had changed. Each frame still held his face, but the eyes were all wrong, too large, too glassy, staring directly at him with a knowing calm. One photo showed him smiling, but there was no warmth in it. The curve of the lips was precise, practiced, as if someone had assembled it without understanding what a smile was supposed to feel like. His stomach lurched, and he averted his eyes, but he felt their gaze following him as he shuffled past. He reached the kitchen and gripped the counter for balance, his fingers drumming against the cold surface. The sound was hollow, echoing too loudly in the still air. He stared at his hand, willing it to feel like his own again. But the longer he looked, the less certain he became. The skin seemed unfamiliar, the knuckles sharper, the nails cleaner than he remembered. He flexed his fingers slowly, and for a terrifying moment, the movement didn't feel voluntary. It felt performed, like a puppet's strings being tugged from above. The thought made his chest tighten until his breath came in shallow, panicked gasps. He backed into the corner, pressing his spine against the wall, as if trying to fuse with it. This isn't real, but the whisper came again, curling softly through the air like a lover's sigh. It is, you just don't remember how long I've been here. His eyes darted wildly around the room, but there was no source for the voice. No mouth, no body, just the words themselves seeping into his head, like water into cloth. The rest of the day dissolved into fragments. He couldn't remember eating. He couldn't remember drinking. At one point, he found himself standing in front of the door, palm pressed against the wood where the fingerprints had been. The surface was smooth now, unblemished, but he could still feel them somehow. Two matching prints burned into his memory like scars. He pulled his hand back and stared at his palm, half expecting to see something there. A faint outline, a shimmer, anything. But it was just skin. Only it didn't feel like skin anymore. When night fell, he didn't move from the spot. The clock struck 3:17, but there were no knocks this time. No footsteps, no whispers, only silence, and that silence was worse. It felt full, heavy, alive. He held his breath and listened, straining for any sound that might anchor him, but all he heard was his own heartbeat. And even that began to sound strange, irregular, as though sinking to a rhythm that wasn't his. He pressed a hand to his chest and froze. For a split second, he thought he felt a second pulse beneath his own, faint and slow but undeniably there. His vision blurred as panic surged through him, his body trembling so violently he thought his bones might shatter. And then came the voice, softer now, almost comforting. "Stop fighting. You don't have to anymore. You're home." The words echoed in his skull, deep and resonant, until they didn't sound like a separate voice at all. They sounded like his own thoughts. He woke to find himself standing in the hallway. No memory of getting up, no memory of moving. His feet were bare and cold against the wood, his hands hanging limply at his sides. He blinked, trying to shake the fog from his mind, but it clung stubbornly, thick as tar. The pictures on the wall stared back at him, every set of glassy eyes unblinking. Some frames had shifted slightly, tilted at angles too deliberate to be accidents. One photo had fallen entirely. Its glass cracked. He crouched down to pick it up, and as his fingers brushed the surface, a shiver ran through him. The face in the photo wasn't quite his. The eyes were too dark, the mouth too wide. It smiled anyway. His breath hitched as he straightened, clutching the photo tightly. He wanted to drop it, to smash it, but his fingers wouldn't obey. They tightened around the frame instead, the glass digging into his palm. He stared in horror as a thin rivulet of blood welled up and trickled down his wrist, but the pain never came. There was only a dull, distant pressure, as though his hand belonged to someone else. He staggered back against the wall, the photo clattering to the floor. The cracked glass reflected his face, fragmented into jagged shards. Each fragment smiled independently, some grinning too wide, others showing no expression at all. He pressed both hands to his head, gripping his hair as if he could squeeze the wrongness out. This isn't me. This isn't my house. This isn't... The thought was cut off by a soft rustling sound from the living room. He froze. It wasn't the sound of the house settling or the wind outside. It was steady, intentional, like fingers brushing along the walls as they moved. He tried to swallow, but his throat was dry. His legs moved without his consent, carrying him toward the sound with slow, shuffling steps. The living room was dim, the curtains drawn tight. The armchair sat empty, though the cushion bore a faint impression, as though someone had just risen from it. On the coffee table lay a single sheet of paper. His heart sank when he saw the smudged fingerprint in the corner. He picked it up with trembling hands, eyes scanning the words scrawled across the page, in a handwriting that matched his perfectly. "You are already home. Stop trying to leave." The words pulsed on the page, faintly glowing as though alive. His fingers began to tremble violently, and the paper slipped from his grasp. It drifted to the floor soundlessly, landing face up, the message staring at him like an accusation. He backed away, but his heel caught the rug, and he fell hard, his head smacking the floor. Stars burst across his vision, and for a moment he thought he saw something standing over him, tall, thin, with a face half-formed, shifting constantly like liquid. But when he blinked, the figure was gone. Only the ceiling stared down at him now, blank and indifferent. He crawled backward until his shoulders hit the wall, The voice returned, closer now, dripping with familiarity. It's so much easier when you stop struggling. You were meant to let me in. His chest heaved, his breath ragged and uneven. He whispered hoarsely, his voice cracking, "What are you?" The answer came like a caress, intimate and final. "I'm the part you left outside." The words echoed through him, settling into his bones like a truth he had always known, but never wanted to face. He pressed his palms over his ears, but they wouldn't stop. "You locked me out for years. You wore this body like it was only yours. But we were never separate. We never could be." His vision blurred with tears as a sharp pain blossomed in his chest. Not physical, but deep, emotional, like mourning something he couldn't even name. He woke to find himself standing in the hallway. No memory of getting up. No memory of moving. His feet were bare and cold against the wood, his hands hanging limply at his sides. He blinked, trying to shake the fog from his mind, but it clung stubbornly, thick as tar. The pictures on the wall stared back at him, every set of glassy eyes unblinking. Some frames had shifted slightly, tilted at angles too deliberate to be accidents. One photo had fallen entirely. Its glass cracked. He crouched down to pick it up, and as his fingers brushed the surface, a shiver ran through him. The face in the photo wasn't quite his. The eyes were too dark, the mouth too wide. It smiled anyway. His breath hitched as he straightened, clutching the photo tightly. He wanted to drop it, to smash it, but his fingers wouldn't obey. They tightened around the frame instead, the glass digging into his palm. He stared in horror as a thin rivulet of blood welled up and trickled down his wrist, but the pain never came. There was only a dull, distant pressure, as though his hand belonged to someone else. He staggered back against the wall, the photo clattering to the floor. The cracked glass reflected his face, fragmented into jagged shards. Each fragment smiled independently, some grinning too wide, others showing no expression at all. He pressed both hands to his head, gripping his hair as if he could squeeze the wrongness out. "This isn't me. This isn't my house. This isn't—" The thought was cut off by a soft rustling sound from the living room. He froze. It wasn't the sound of the house settling or the wind outside. It was steady, intentional, like fingers brushing along the walls as they moved. He tried to swallow, but his throat was dry. His legs moved without his consent, carrying him toward the sound with slow, shuffling steps. The living room was dim, the curtains drawn tight. The armchair sat empty, though the cushion bore a faint impression, as though someone had just risen from it. On the coffee table lay a single sheet of paper. His heart sank when he saw the smudged fingerprint in the corner. He picked it up with trembling hands, eyes scanning the words scrawled across the page, in a handwriting that matched his perfectly. "You are already home. Stop trying to leave." The words pulsed on the page, faintly glowing as though alive. His fingers began to tremble violently, and the paper slipped from his grasp. It drifted to the floor soundlessly, landing face up, the message staring at him like an accusation. He backed away, but his heel caught the rug, and he fell hard, his head smacking the floor. Stars burst across his vision, and for a moment he thought he saw something standing over him, tall, thin, with a face half-formed, shifting constantly like liquid. But when he blinked, the figure was gone. Only the ceiling stared down at him now, blank and indifferent. He crawled backward until his shoulders hit the wall. The voice returned, closer now, dripping with familiarity. "It's so much easier when you stop struggling. You were meant to let me in." His chest heaved, his breath ragged and uneven. He whispered hoarsely, his voice cracking, "What are you?" The answer came like a caress, intimate and final. "I'm the part you left outside." The words echoed through him, settling into his bones like a truth he had always known, but never wanted to face. He pressed his palms over his ears, but they wouldn't stop. "You locked me out for years. You wore this body like it was only yours. But we were never separate. We never could be." His vision blurred with tears as a sharp pain blossomed in his chest. Not physical, but deep, emotional, like mourning something he couldn't even name. The house had gone quiet again, but the silence wasn't empty. It throbbed like a living thing holding its breath. He pressed his back tighter against the wall, his palms slick with sweat, his chest rising and falling in shallow, frantic gasps. The voice's last words echoed inside his skull, relentless. "I'm the part you left outside." He wanted to scream, to claw at his own head until the sound was gone, but his body refused him. His arms felt heavy, foreign, as if draped in wet cloth. Even blinking took effort, his eyelids dragging like lead curtains. A faint scratching sound began to rise from behind the walls, slow at first, like a single nail tracing lazy circles in the wood. It grew sharper, faster, until it sounded like dozens of fingers clawing their way toward him. He pressed his hands over his ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't coming from outside anymore. It was inside. Burrowing deep, threading through his thoughts like roots tearing through soil. "You fought for so long," the voice murmured, low and coaxing, "but fighting only hurts us both." He stumbled to his feet, legs quaking beneath him, and staggered down the hallway. Every picture frame he passed had shifted again. His eyes peered back at him from the glass, but they weren't right. Some smiled too widely. Some didn't blink. Some seemed to press against the glass from the inside, leaving faint smudges like hands dragging down a window pane. He averted his gaze and kept moving, but the air felt thicker with each step, clinging to his skin like humidity before a storm. The door loomed at the end of the hallway, its surface now pristine. No fingerprints, no marks, no evidence anything had ever been there, but he could feel it, something waiting just beyond, patient as the grave. He reached for the deadbolt with trembling fingers, then froze. A part of him screamed to stop, but another part, calm, assured, whispered that opening it wouldn't matter anymore. "It's already here." The thought wasn't his, or maybe it was. He couldn't tell the difference anymore. He staggered back into the living room, the shadows stretching longer than they should, curling toward him like grasping hands. His reflection caught his eye in the darkened TV screen. At first it seemed normal, haggard and pale, but still him. Then the reflection blinked. He didn't. Slowly, deliberately, it raised a hand and pressed its palm flat against the glass. His stomach turned to ice as he saw faint smudges bloom under the fingers, forming a perfect handprint on the screen's surface. His own hand twitched at his side, mimicking the gesture without his consent. "There's no difference anymore," the voice purred from the reflection. "You just haven't accepted it." The image's mouth curved into a smile so slight, it was almost tender. "But you will. You always do." He wanted to look away, but his eyes locked onto the screen as though magnetized. The smile deepened. The reflection whispered one final time, the words reverberating in his chest like a second heartbeat. "I didn't take your place. I was your place." Morning didn't arrive. Not really. The weak light filtering through the curtains was grey, thin, as if the sun had grown weary of trying. He sat motionless on the floor, his back against the cold plaster, staring at the blank TV screen. His own face stared back from the dark glass, pale and sunken-eyed, but there was a stillness in its expression that didn't feel like him anymore. He rubbed his eyes with trembling hands and looked again. The reflection smiled faintly. His stomach turned. The house was too quiet. Even the usual sounds, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of settling wood, had fallen away. It felt like being underwater, every movement slow, every sound muffled. He forced himself to stand, his joints stiff as if he'd been sitting for days instead of hours. His feet dragged across the floor, leaving faint scuff marks. He didn't remember them ever doing that before, or maybe he'd never noticed. The thought sent a chill down his spine. In the hallway, the picture frames were gone. The walls were bare now, faint outlines where the frames had hung like ghosts of memories erased. He reached out and ran his fingers over the empty spaces, but even the dust felt wrong, too fine, too soft, almost like ash. His hand trembled as he pulled it back, and for a moment he thought he saw faint fingerprints pressed into his skin, unfamiliar and too large to be his. He wiped his palm against his shirt, but the sensation of being touched lingered. The kitchen offered no comfort. The counters were spotless, the sink empty. The clock on the wall had stopped at 3:17. His chest tightened at the sight. He ripped it from the wall and hurled it across the room, the glass shattering on impact. But even then, the faint ticking continued, soft and steady, echoing from somewhere deep within the house. He pressed his hands over his ears, but it didn't stop. Tick, 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 each sound a reminder that time here didn't belong to him anymore. He stumbled back into the living room, and the TV flickered to life on its own. Static hissed across the screen before resolving into a faint image. Himself, standing in the doorway, staring directly at the camera. But it wasn't a recording. It was live. He looked down at his hands. He wasn't holding a camera. He wasn't standing. But the figure on the screen lifted its hand, palm out, and pressed it flat against the glass. A perfect handprint bloomed there, identical to the one he'd seen on the door so many nights ago. The figure on the screen spoke, though its lips never moved. The voice seeped into the room from all directions, soft and deliberate. "You're not the first, you won't be the last, but you are the only one who locked me out for this long." His stomach churned violently, and he stumbled back until his knees hit the armchair. The figure's eyes seemed to follow him, calm and unblinking. "That's why it hurts so much." The voice whispered, "You're still clinging to the idea you were whole." The lights flickered once, twice, then died completely. Darkness swallowed the room, and the screen went black. But in the reflection of the glass, two pairs of eyes glowed faintly, his own and another set, larger, closer, watching from over his shoulder. He couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. The second pair of eyes blinked, slowly, deliberately. The word in the mirror didn't fade. It stayed etched in the fog as if carved there, each letter sharp and deliberate. "Welcome." His breath came ragged now, chest heaving as though he'd run a mile. He took a tentative step back, his shoes squeaking faintly against the tile. The reflection moved in perfect sync, not delayed, not imperfect, except for its eyes. They didn't blink, they didn't waver, they only watched. The house groaned around him, the sound deep and mournful, like the settling of ancient wood. But beneath it he heard faint whispers threading through the air, indistinct at first. As he strained to listen, the words resolved into something terrifyingly familiar. His own voice, repeating the same phrase over and over in a slow, almost soothing cadence. "I was always here. You just weren't looking." The sound came from nowhere and everywhere, filling the space like a presence too large to be contained. He staggered out of the bathroom, slamming the door shut behind him. The hallway was darker now, longer somehow. Each step forward felt wrong, as if the house itself stretched and shifted with his movement. The faces pressed into the walls seemed closer than before, their features more distinct. One had its mouth open in a silent scream. Another smiled with jagged, uneven teeth. A third seemed to be crying thick, black tears that left faint streaks on the plaster. He kept his eyes forward, but he could feel them following him. When he reached the living room, the TV had turned on again. This time, it didn't show his reflection. It showed the front door, a camera angle from outside. Though he had no cameras, the door was closed, but faint smudges bloomed on the wood, handprints dragging slowly down its surface. A faint knocking echoed from the speakers, 3 measured raps. Then a pause, then 3 more. He froze, his stomach twisting. The knocking wasn't coming from the speakers. It was coming from behind him. He spun around. The hallway stretched into darkness, silent. But there at the far end, 2 faint glowing eyes hovered just above the floor. They blinked slowly, calmly. The knocking came again. Knock, knock. The sound vibrated through his bones. This time, deeper and heavier than wood should allow. He backed away until his calves hit the couch. His knees buckled, and he collapsed into the cushions, his chest heaving in shallow gasps. The voice came again, impossibly close, curling like smoke around his ears. "You're in my house now." His head jerked toward the sound, but there was no one there, only shadows curling in unnatural shapes along the walls. He pressed his hands to his face, fingers digging into his scalp. His own voice whispered from behind his palms. "There was never a door. You built that lie to keep me out." The lights flickered violently, then burst with a sound like shattering glass. Darkness swallowed everything. The TV screen went black, but faintly, just faintly, his face remained visible in the glass. This time, it wasn't moving, it was staring, smiling. The darkness didn't lift, it thickened instead, pressing against his skin like damp cloth. The faint image in the TV screen remained, his face pale and calm, staring back from a black void. Its eyes didn't blink. Its mouth didn't move. But as he watched, paralyzed and shaking, a faint smile began to stretch across its lips. Not sudden, not sharp, slow, deliberate, as though savoring every second it took to form. His breath caught in his throat. He wanted to turn away to break the connection, but his body wouldn't obey. His own reflection was holding him there, staring him down like prey too exhausted to flee. Why fight anymore? The voice came, soft and steady, curling around him like smoke. You were always going to open the door. You just didn't know which side you were standing on. The floor beneath him vibrated faintly, the same dull pulse he'd felt before. It rose in intensity, matching his racing heartbeat, until they blended into a single drumming rhythm. His hands clutched at the couch cushions, nails digging deep. But even that sensation felt muted, distant. He could feel something behind him now, warmth radiating, a presence so close it brushed against the hairs on his neck. He didn't turn. He couldn't. A single light breath ghosted over his ear. Then the voice whispered, quieter than ever but cutting straight into his bones. "I'm not behind you. You're behind me." Something inside him snapped. He bolted from the couch. his legs unsteady, his chest burning with each shallow breath. He stumbled toward the hallway, but it was wrong now. Longer, narrower, the walls pressing in with faces that seemed to shift as he passed. One whispered his name, another sobbed. A third grinned wide enough to split its face in two. He pressed his palms to his temples and ran, eyes shut, trusting his feet to find the way out. When he opened his eyes again, he wasn't in the hallway anymore. He stood at the door. The wood was pristine, smooth, except for one thing. A single fingerprint smudged near the handle, his own. He raised his hand and stared at it, willing the smudge to vanish, but it stayed, fresh, clear, waiting. A realization struck him like a hammer to the chest. He had never stopped touching the door. He had never left the threshold. "You don't remember, do you?" the voice asked. Warm and pitying. "You never left. You only thought you did." His body moved of its own accord now, his fingers brushing the handle. The metal was warm, almost pulsing like a living thing. The voice grew louder, filling his head, each word heavier than the last. "You're not the one locked inside. I am." His hand turned the knob slowly, deliberately, and as the door creaked open, light poured in. Not warm daylight, but a cold grey glow that washed over everything. He stepped through before he could stop himself. The house behind him dissolved into darkness. Ahead, an identical house stretched before him, every detail perfectly replicated. The walls, the pictures, even the faint smudges on the TV screen. But something was off. This version felt hollow, weightless, as though it had been waiting for him to arrive. And in the center of the room stood his reflection, not in glass, not on a screen, but fully formed. It smiled with gentle finality and whispered, "Now we're whole." The house was wrong. He knew it, the moment his feet crossed the threshold. The air smelled faintly of dust, and something sweeter beneath it, like spoiled fruit left too long in the sun. The floorboards creaked underfoot, but the sound was muted, dampened somehow. He paused in the doorway, his fingers still resting on the warm metal of the knob, reluctant to let go. Behind him, the door shut on its own, with a soft, final click. The silence settled heavy in his chest. He could hear his own heartbeat too clearly, loud and slow as if struggling through thick syrup. He turned slowly, scanning the room. Everything looked identical to the home he remembered. Same couch, same coffee table, same cracked photo frame on the floor. But there was a hollowness to it now, like a stage set waiting for actors who would never arrive. His stomach twisted at the thought. The TV screen flickered on without warning. No static this time, no reflection. It showed the door he had just come through, though the angle was impossibly wrong, as though seen from inside his own eyes. He watched himself standing there, pale and stiff, staring at the screen with an expression of vacant terror. But he wasn't moving now. He wasn't breathing. His reflection on the screen smiled faintly, the corners of its mouth twitching, as if learning the shape of the gesture. "You see it now," the voice whispered, faint but close enough to feel on his skin. His chest tightened. He stumbled backward, his heel catching the edge of the rug. As he fell, the room seemed to shift around him, walls pulsing faintly, breathing. The couch stretched longer, the photos on the walls melting into black smudges that oozed slowly downward. He scrambled to his feet, his palms slick with sweat. "This isn't my house. It never was." The thought hit him like ice water, and yet a calm part of him, buried deep, simply nodded in agreement. He moved to the hallway, hoping to find some way out. but the corridor stretched impossibly far now, doors lining either side, like ribs in a darkened maw. Each door bore faint handprints, some small like a child's, others massive, the fingers unnaturally long. He pressed forward, his breath shallow, but every step made the air feel thicker, like wading into deep water. His hands brushed the walls, and the faint texture beneath his fingers was wrong, soft, yielding, almost like flesh. The whispers returned, threading through the silence like veins of smoke. You knocked first, you let me in. This is what you wanted. He clamped his hands over his ears, but the sound only grew louder, rising and falling in waves. You wanted warmth, you wanted company. You just didn't expect me to look like you. His knees buckled, and he sank to the floor. The end of the hallway loomed ahead, a door identical to the one he'd just entered through. He crawled toward it, his nails scratching the wood floor, leaving faint gouges behind. The door pulsed faintly, with that same heartbeat rhythm, each throb sending a tremor through his bones. He reached for the handle, his hand trembling violently. The voice came again, soft and final. You're knocking on your own door now. The silence was no longer silence. It was dense, a pressure in his ears, like water rushing in from all sides. He could feel it, thick and heavy, the way air feels before a thunderstorm. He pressed his back to the cold wall and tried to slow his breathing, but every inhale felt shallow, fragile, as though he wasn't pulling air into his lungs, but something heavier, something that wanted to weigh him down. His fingers clawed at the plaster behind him. It was warm, too warm, like skin flushed with fever. He told himself to move. He needed to move, but his legs refused, trembling beneath him like a child's. The hallway stretched ahead, impossibly long now, lined with doors on either side. They hadn't been there before. Each one bore faint marks, fingerprints, palm smudges, long drag lines across the wood, as though countless hands had reached out, desperate to be let in or out. He couldn't tell anymore. He wanted to shut his eyes and pretend the hall wasn't there, but even with his eyelids squeezed tight, the image of those doors burned behind them. Then the sound came. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp, deliberate. Knock, knock. 3 precise raps. He flinched, his whole body seizing, as if struck. The sound wasn't coming from the doors. It wasn't coming from behind him. It was coming from within him, resonating in his chest, rattling his ribs. His hands clutched at his sternum, as though he could rip the sound out. But it didn't stop. It repeated, steady and patient, with the weight of something eternal. He forced his legs to move, his feet dragging across the wood. Each step echoed louder than it should have, the sound bouncing off the walls in strange, delayed rhythms, as though something was following a few paces behind, perfectly mimicking his movements. His shadow stretched unnaturally in the dim light, distorting, twisting like it was trying to pull away from his feet. He didn't dare look directly at it. At the far end of the hallway, a door stood ajar, thin grey light seeped from the crack, spilling across the floor in a long, trembling line. He told himself not to go there, not to step into whatever waited on the other side. But his body betrayed him again, his feet carrying him forward in slow, mechanical strides. The closer he got, the louder the knocking grew, not outside now, but everywhere, in the walls, in the floor, in his own skull. As he reached for the knob, a whisper coiled through the air like smoke. You're not knocking to get out. You're knocking to be let back in. His fingers froze inches from the metal, trembling violently. His throat was dry, his voice barely audible as he croaked. "That's not true." But even as he said it, a sickening certainty bloomed in his gut. The knocking wasn't asking for permission. It was a signal, a call to return. The door swung open before he could decide. On the other side was the living room. The same couch, the same television, but the walls here pulsed faintly, as if alive. The television flickered to life, and his stomach turned to stone as he saw himself standing there on the screen, one hand pressed against the front door, his palm leaving a perfect print. He whispered to the image, "That's not me." But the figure on the screen smiled faintly and spoke in his own voice. It always was. The lights above him flickered violently, casting rapid flashes of shadow that danced like figures across the walls. He backed away, hands shaking, but the couch was already behind his knees. He collapsed onto it, and the cushions exhaled a faint, warm breath beneath him. The air thickened again, and he could hear a heartbeat, his own but slower now. He pressed his hands over his ears, desperate to block the sound, but another heartbeat joined it, deeper, stronger, pounding in perfect counterpoint. The voice returned, low and patient. "You knocked first. You asked for this. You thought you were keeping me out." The words seeped into his head like oil, clinging to his thoughts. "But all this time, you were on the wrong side." His body felt heavy now, his limbs leaden. He tried to rise, but the couch seemed to clutch at him, holding him in place. He could feel the cushions breathing beneath him, faint and slow. His reflection in the television leaned closer, pressing its palm against the glass. A perfect smudge bloomed there, his fingerprint, identical, fresh. He realized with sick clarity that he wasn't watching a recording. He was watching himself from the other side. Knock, knock, knock. This time the sound came from within his chest. His ribs vibrated with it, his whole body shuddering like a hollow drum. Tears streaked down his face, and he whispered brokenly, "Please, I don't want this." The voice answered softly, almost tender. "You asked for it every time you turned away. Every time you denied what you are." The lights died completely, plunging the room into blackness, but he could feel eyes on him, warm, patient, waiting. A final whisper came from everywhere at once. "There's only ever been one door, and you're the one knocking." The blackness was complete now, thick and oppressive like a blanket pressed over his face. He could feel it on his skin, warm and damp, clinging to him as though it had weight. His fingers flexed against the couch cushions, which pulsed faintly beneath his palms like a living thing. He wanted to scream, to fight, but his throat felt stuffed with cotton, and only a hoarse whisper escaped. "I don't belong here." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, soft and patient, like the hush of breath against his ear. "You've never left." The words seemed to seep into his bones, heavier than sound, as though they had mass. "You thought the door was keeping me out, but it's been keeping you in." A faint light began to glow in the distance. Not daylight, not electric, but a sickly, pulsing grey that felt alive. He forced himself to rise, his legs trembling under the weight of his own body. The floor beneath his feet seemed to ripple faintly, as if he were standing on the surface of deep water. Each step sent shivers through his calves, and the faint knocking returned, not in the walls, not from behind him, but from directly beneath his feet. Knock, knock. He tried to move faster, to put distance between himself and the sound, but the hallway was impossibly long again, stretching with every step. The doors on either side multiplied, their surfaces marred with fingerprints, claw marks, streaks of something dark that he didn't want to name. Each door seemed to breathe faintly, the wood rising and falling, as though hiding a chest beneath it. He reached for one at random, desperate to open it, but his hand froze inches from the handle. A deep, guttural voice whispered from the other side. "I'm waiting." He stumbled back, his spine pressing against the opposite wall. The plaster was warm, slick. He yanked his shoulder away and found his shirt damp where it had touched. His stomach churned violently, bile rising in his throat. He turned and ran, not knowing where, not caring, only moving to keep the growing presence at his back from overtaking him. The light grew brighter as he ran, but it wasn't welcoming. It pulsed in jagged rhythms, like a failing heartbeat, and each flash illuminated brief, impossible glimpses, hands pushing out from the walls, stretching the plaster like thin fabric, eyes watching from the ceilings, unblinking and glassy, shadows writhing in the corners, too formless to be human, but too deliberate to be accidents. At last, the hallway ended at a single door, identical to the front door of his house. His breath came in ragged gasps as he reached for the knob. His palm hovered inches from it, and in the faint glow he saw it, his own fingerprint smudged perfectly into the metal. His stomach dropped like a stone in water. "This isn't a way out," he whispered to himself. But deep down, a quieter part of him, calm, certain, responded. It never was. The knocking came again, impossibly loud this time, rattling the door in its frame. His chest vibrated with each sound, his ribs aching under the force of it. The voice returned, tender now, almost pitying. "Open it, end the knocking." He closed his eyes, hot tears streaming down his cheeks. He whispered a plea he wasn't sure who would hear. "Please, don't make me." But his hand moved anyway, his fingers curling around the knob, the warmth of it searing against his skin. As he turned it, the knocking ceased. On the other side of the door was the living room. His living room, the same couch, the same television, the same faint handprint on the screen. But this time, he wasn't alone. Sitting on the couch was himself, or a version of himself, pale, still, eyes wide and glassy, staring directly at him. It smiled faintly, lips curling into a shape that felt wrong on his own face. "I've been waiting," it said in his voice, calm and steady. The figure on the couch didn't blink. It didn't shift or breathe or fidget the way people do when they're being watched. It just sat there, still as a photograph, with that faint smile frozen on its face, his face. The eyes were worse than the smile, wide, glassy, reflecting too much light, like wet glass. He wanted to speak, to demand answers, to scream, but his throat closed tight. All that came out was a hoarse whisper, "Who are you?" The figure tilted its head slightly, a movement so familiar it made his skin crawl. "You keep asking questions you already know the answer to," it said, and its voice was his voice, perfectly matched. "You're still trying to separate us. Pretend you're you and I'm something else. But the door doesn't separate. It joins." The couch groaned faintly as the figure leaned forward, resting its elbows on its knees, its grin widening by fractions. "Do you know how many times you've opened the door now?" The question wasn't rhetorical. It waited, patient. He shook his head mutely, though deep down, some part of him knew. Too many, or maybe just once, stretched across eternity like a loop of film catching in the projector. The knocking started again, soft and deliberate. Knock, knock. But it wasn't coming from the walls or the door. It was coming from within him. His chest ached with each impact, ribs vibrating faintly, as though his sternum were hollow wood. He clutched at his shirt front, willing the sound to stop, but it only grew louder. The figure mirrored the motion, pressing a hand over its chest, and smiled faintly. "You hear it now. You've always heard it. You're just finally listening." He staggered backward until his shoulders struck the wall. The plaster pulsed faintly against his spine, warm and alive. He whispered, broken, "I don't want this. I didn't ask for this." The figure rose slowly from the couch, moving with a languid grace, each step silent, despite the old wood floor. "You did," it replied. "Every time you turned away from the knock, every time you denied who you were." Its smile softened into something almost tender. "This is your house. I just kept it warm for you." The room around them began to distort, the walls rippling like the surface of deep water. Shadows bled upward from the floorboards, coiling in unnatural shapes. The light flickered violently, stuttering between moments of darkness and brief, blinding flashes. Each flash showed impossible scenes, countless versions of him standing at countless doors, some screaming, some weeping, some grinning with wild, empty eyes. The figure extended a hand. Its palm bore a fresh fingerprint, clear and perfect, identical to the one he'd seen smudged on every surface. "It's time to stop knocking," it said gently. "Time to come in." He stared at the hand, chest heaving. His own hand rose, trembling, despite every muscle in his body screaming to resist. The air grew thick and warm, pressing against his skin like wet cloth. Tears blurred his vision as his fingers brushed its palm. The moment they touched, the knocking in his chest ceased. Silence rushed in like a breaking wave, crushing and absolute. Then softly, faintly, the voice whispered, "Welcome home." He didn't remember closing his eyes, but when he opened them again, everything was different. The room looked the same couch, the same faintly flickering television, the same framed photos on the wall, but the air had changed. It carried a thickness, like humidity mixed with the faint, cloying scent of something metallic. Each breath felt heavy, as though the oxygen had been replaced with a weightier gas that clung to his lungs. His fingers twitched at his sides, and the simple movement felt strange, too slow, too deliberate, as though he were moving through water. The television screen glowed faintly, though no image filled it this time, only darkness, deep and endless, stretching far beyond the glass. He found himself staring into it, unable to tear his eyes away, a growing sense of vertigo swirling in his gut. As he watched, faint ripples spread across the screen, like something moving just beneath its surface. Then came the sound, a single deliberate knock, deep and resonant. It didn't come from the screen. It came from behind his ribs, reverberating in his bones. He staggered back, clutching at his chest. The room groaned faintly, a long, low sound like the settling of old wood. But this time, it wasn't just sound. The walls quivered slightly, as though exhaling. The photographs on the walls blurred at the edges, the smiling faces within them shifting in subtle, sickening ways, their eyes becoming too wide, their mouths stretching a little too far. He turned away, his stomach heaving violently. The floor beneath him pulsed faintly with each step, like the slow, steady thrum of a heartbeat. He tried to focus, to think logically, but the house no longer felt like a place. It felt like a body, or worse, like an idea of a body, a living memory he had been forced into. The thought made his skin crawl. He whispered to himself, voice shaking, "This isn't real, this isn't real." But deep down, A quiet certainty answered, "It's more real than you are." A sound behind him made him freeze. Footsteps, slow, heavy. He turned sharply, but the hallway was empty. Only the faint echo of movement remained, receding as though leading him forward. He swallowed hard, his throat dry and burning, and forced his feet to follow. The hallway seemed endless now, stretching with each step, doors multiplying on either side. Each door bore smudges, faint fingerprints, palm prints, claw marks, evidence of countless desperate hands. He reached for one door at random, fingers trembling as they brushed the knob. It was warm, almost feverish. A low hum vibrated through the metal, like a trapped heartbeat. He pressed his ear to the wood. On the other side, faint sobbing, a voice whispered brokenly, over and over, "Please let me out, please let me out." His own voice. He jerked back, his heart hammering in his chest. The voice stopped abruptly, replaced by silence, so deep it felt like pressure in his skull. Then, softly, tenderly, "Why would I let you out? You came here to stay." The silence pressed in like water, filling a tight space. His breath sounded too loud, ragged and uneven, echoing faintly off the walls. He staggered backward from the door, his hands shaking violently as though they no longer belonged to him. The voice still echoed in his skull, soft and patient. "You came here to stay." He wanted to scream, to deny it, but the words felt too heavy in his throat, like they'd been waiting there all along. The floor pulsed again beneath his feet, stronger now, and with each rhythmic thrum he felt his legs weaken. He dropped to his knees, palms splayed on the wood. It was warm, slick, faintly yielding under his touch. The boards shivered faintly as though reacting to him, alive in a way that made his stomach twist. He whispered hoarsely, "This isn't my house. This isn't real." But somewhere deeper, a calm certainty whispered back, "It never had to be." A faint sound drew his attention forward. It wasn't footsteps this time, but a low, wet dragging, like something heavy being pulled across the floorboards far ahead. He forced himself to rise, each movement clumsy, sluggish, as though gravity had doubled its hold on him. The hallway stretched on forever. Each door he passed nearly identical, except for the markings, scratches, stains, handprints, each one a silent witness to whatever lay behind them. He kept his gaze ahead, unwilling to risk looking too closely. The dragging sound grew louder. Then a whisper joined it, faint but distinct. "I'm not behind the door, I'm behind you." He froze, his entire body locking in place. His breath caught painfully in his chest, and the air seemed to grow thick with heat. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, he turned his head. There was nothing, only the hallway, only the doors. But a faint reflection in the doorknob beside him caught his eye. He leaned closer against every screaming instinct. What stared back wasn't quite his reflection. The eyes were too wide, too bright. The smile curled a fraction too high. And the face, his face was pressed so close to the metal it distorted, rippling faintly like something seen through water. The reflection spoke without moving its lips. "I've been following you for so long. Aren't you tired?" He stumbled back, slamming into the opposite wall. The wood pulsed against his back, warm and damp, and he jerked forward again, retching violently. Nothing came up. The hallway pulsed with him, and faint, rhythmic knocks began in the walls, slow at first, then quicker, like a heartbeat accelerating. The sound surrounded him now, resonating deep in his chest, until his ribs vibrated painfully. He clutched at his sternum, gasping, but the knocking only grew louder, more insistent, until it felt like his entire body was a drum being struck from within. He fell to his knees, head bowed as tears streamed down his face. The voice came again, softer than before, almost loving. "You don't need to keep knocking. You're already inside." Chapter 6. Through the Door That Wasn't There, Part 3 of 4, 1601 words. The knocking didn't stop. Even with his hands clamped tightly over his ears, he could feel it vibrating in his teeth, rattling his skull like a distant drum beat. It wasn't outside. It wasn't in the walls. It was inside him now, deep beneath his ribcage, each knock pressing outward like fists against a locked door. His vision blurred as he stumbled forward down the endless hallway, his legs shaking violently with every step. The doors lining either side began to change as he passed them. No longer uniform, no longer safe in their sameness. Each door now bore faint carvings, symbols he didn't recognize, etched deep into the wood, as if by desperate fingernails. Some were cracked down the middle, their hinges groaning faintly, as if something on the other side was leaning against them, waiting. One door shivered violently as he passed, the handle rattling as a faint whisper slipped through the gap beneath it. "You let me in once, you'll let me in again." He pressed on, his hands scraping against the walls for balance. The wallpaper peeled beneath his touch, revealing something dark and slick underneath, something that pulsed faintly, like muscle. He yanked his hands back, bile rising in his throat. The air had grown thicker now, damp and hot, clinging to his skin like sweat. His breathing was ragged, uneven, and every exhale seemed to carry with it the faintest echo of his own voice whispering, "Let me out, let me out." Ahead, the hallway ended at a door bathed in faint grey light. His chest seized at the sight of it, recognition blooming like a cold flower in his stomach. It was the same door, the one he had entered, the one he had left behind. He stumbled toward it, his pulse roaring in his ears. This is the way out. This has to be the way out. The knocking grew louder as he approached, each strike sending tremors up through the floorboards and into his legs. He pressed a trembling hand to the knob. It was warm, too warm, almost feverish. As he closed his fingers around it, a sharp whisper hissed from behind him. "That's not an exit, it's an entrance." He froze, slowly, against his will. He turned his head. At the far end of the hallway stood his reflection, not in a mirror, not in glass, but solid, breathing, smiling faintly. Its eyes were wrong, too wide, and too bright. It raised a hand, palm out, and whispered in his own voice, "You've been knocking to get in, and now you're here." Panic tore through him as he yanked at the door. It didn't budge. The knob twisted in his hands, but it wouldn't open. His reflection began to walk forward, slow and steady, its footsteps silent on the floorboards. The knocking had become a roar now, a constant pounding in his skull and chest, shaking the hallway so violently the doors rattled in their frames. His reflection stopped a few feet away, still smiling, and whispered, "There's no leaving, there never was. You are the knock." The silence was heavier than the knocking had ever been. It wasn't absence, it was suffocation, as if the air itself had been pressed out of the hallway, replaced by something thicker, warmer, alive. His lungs burned as he gasped in shallow spurts, each breath tasting faintly of copper and smoke. He pressed his back harder against the door behind him, his fingers clutching the handle so tightly his knuckles turned bone white. But the knob no longer felt like metal. It felt soft, warm, like flesh. The reflection stood only feet away now, and it smiled faintly, not with malice, not even with joy, but with a calmness, that sent ice crawling up his spine. It raised its hand slowly, deliberately, palm outward. A fresh fingerprint glistened there, slick and new, as though pressed moments ago. "You've been trying so hard to get out," it said softly, its voice carrying an odd, vibrating resonance that filled the space between them. "But there's nothing out there. Only this. Only me. Only you." His entire body shook, from his jaw to his knees. "I'm not you," he whispered hoarsely. The words sounded thin, fragile, ridiculous in the oppressive weight of the hallway. The reflection tilted its head, its grin deepening by degrees. "That's what they all say, every time." A low groan rolled through the hallway, like the sound of a massive door opening somewhere unseen. The walls trembled, and the floor pulsed beneath his feet like a heartbeat. With each pulse, he felt weaker, his legs threatening to buckle. The wallpaper peeled back, as if under invisible hands, revealing glistening layers of dark, wet muscle beneath. The sight turned his stomach violently, bile rising in his throat. "You've been here before," the reflection whispered. It stepped closer, its bare feet leaving faint prints on the wood that steamed faintly in their wake. "You've always been here, every time you touched the door, every time you ignored the knock." He shook his head violently, tears streaming down his face. "No, no, I never." "Yes," it interrupted gently, cutting through his protest with a terrifying certainty. "You always knock." The sound returned then, not from the walls or behind the door, but from inside him. Knock, knock. Each vibration sent shocks of pain up his ribcage. He clutched at his chest, fingers digging into his sternum as if trying to claw out the sound. His knees buckled, and he crumpled to the floor with a broken sob. The reflection knelt in front of him, and its smile softened. "You think you're the victim here. You're not. You were never locked out. You're the thing on the other side. The sound they're terrified of. You're the knocking." "No." The word tore out of him like a wounded animal's cry. He tried to scramble backward, but the door behind him pulsed, warm and slick, pressing him forward again. "Yes," the reflection's voice dropped to a whisper. "You're what's been waiting to be let in. Every door, every home, every terrified heartbeat behind the wood. It's you." And every time, it pressed a hand gently to his chest. "You find your way back." The knocking stopped. Silence fell like a heavy curtain, so absolute it made his ears ring. For a moment he thought maybe it was over, that maybe he'd been spared. Then he felt it, a warmth spreading out from the reflection's palm, radiating through his ribs like a low flame. His vision blurred as images exploded behind his eyes. He saw himself, countless versions of himself, standing in front of countless doors. Some were splintered with age, others pristine. Some bore deadbolts and chains. Others stood ajar as though inviting, but always the same motion, his hand rising, knuckles rapping against the wood. Sometimes he screamed. Sometimes he cried. Sometimes he grinned in wild, silent ecstasy. One door swung open in the vision. Inside, a family huddled together, clutching one another in wide-eyed terror as he stepped forward, his mouth forming words he couldn't hear. Another door cracked open to reveal an empty room, a crib, overturned toys, dust motes hanging thick in the air as his shadow stretched across the floor. Each vision lasted only a second, yet the weight of them built until he felt as though his skull would crack under the strain. When his eyes opened again, he was standing, not kneeling, not crumpled, but standing tall, his hand pressed flat against the door. His palm left a perfect print on the surface, identical to all the others that marked the wood around him. The reflection now sat on the floor where he had been, gazing up with that same faint smile. "See," it whispered, "you're home." The hallway began to darken at the edges as if a great shadow was swallowing it whole. The doors on either side rattled faintly, and soft, desperate voices whispered behind them, "Don't let him in. Please, don't let him in." He pulled his hand away from the door and looked down at his trembling fingers. They were no longer his own. The skin had darkened slightly, faint veins rising like blue rivers under the surface. His nails were blackened, cracked at the edges. His stomach twisted violently, but the certainty was already there, heavy as stone in his gut. He wasn't knocking to be let out. He was knocking to be let back in. And that's where this chilling story leaves us, on the edge of something far darker than we ever imagined. But what happens next? What secrets still lie beyond that door? And could the knock someday be on your door? If this story kept you hooked, imagine where the next one will take you. So don't just watch. Subscribe now and join us as we uncover more haunting mysteries and dive deeper into the shadows of history. Hit that bell icon because you won't want to miss what's coming next.